My tip with doorways is because they're the entrance into a building, they're a very significant structure. So let's do our best to give them as much three-dimensionality as possible to really capture all those lines of depth that push in backwards from the outside of the building facade. In this case, it's a beautiful old doorway that's set back from the outside of the building, so it's not that hard. So let's give it a go. I decide to start by drawing the actual outline of the door itself, or the door and the panel above it. Now, it's important to realize that these perspective angles are just as important in a doorway as they are in a whole building, and that we have an eye level where the line is, if there is one on the building, is going to be horizontal, and above that the lines will angle increasingly upwards or downwards below the eye level. Now, the eye level line here, if we look at the doors and they've got those two struts going across them holding the glass, that lower strut is just below eye level. So above that line, the lines angle slightly up, and below that line they angle slightly down. So it's always a bit slower at the start of a drawing because we're still trying to work out the proportions and we have nothing to reference off. So I've started with the left-hand side of the actual door itself. I haven't defined the right-hand side of the doorway yet because I'm not sure how far across to take it. These doors are really nicely proportioned with their panes of glass, and if I make the doors too wide, then those panes become too fat. If I make the doorway too skinny, then there won't be room to put the detail of those panes in. So I'm actually working across the doors, and I'll define the width of the doorway when I get to the other side of the doors. The danger or the risk with doing this is that we end up drawing all these details just slightly too wide. This can often be because of allowing for the thickness of the pen itself. And it means that we can lose our proportions. So I'm also trying to keep a sense of how wide is this doorway from one side to the other. Yes, lots of challenging vertical lines in this scene. And now put in the right-hand side of this doorway. There is a step to add, of course. Now, steps can be challenging because steps are one of those things, because we use them all the time and because our bodies, our feet, interact with them so constantly, we have a sense of how they should be proportioned. And if they're not quite right, they tend to be obviously not quite right. So we look at a step and we think, oh, there's not room for someone to put their foot on that for the proportions of the doorway around it. Or they're too steep, or they're too shallow. So it is good to pay more attention to steps than I think we often do. They're also a tremendous thing for creating a sense of three dimensions, a sense of stepping back. So never let the steps be a little awkward afterthought in front. So now I'm going to put in this beautiful glassed area above the doorway, letting in lots of light. So I'm just working out now this timber framing, and I realize I haven't actually left enough space for it with where I've positioned the left-hand side edge of the actual door entranceway itself. But that's not really going to be a problem, and it's not going to be obvious unless we compare my drawing closely with the reference photo. And of course, when we do a drawing, no one's going to see the reference photo. So we shouldn't get hung up with mistakes. We shouldn't get too worried about them, because in most cases, they're not going to be super obvious to someone looking at our drawing. Unless, of course, we make a mistake with the perspective that tends then to just not look quite right, even if we can't work out why. So now I'm finishing. There's a bit of a support beam effect above this doorway, which is again important to get because it helps create the effect of the doorway really being stepped back in some distance from where we step off the street. Now I'm doing what we can see of the edges, the depth lines I call them, of the panes of glass, or the timber supporting the panes of glass. And because of the angle we're looking at, we see the underside of these horizontal lines at the top, but we see on the bottom the top lines. And on that lower center strut, we tend not to see any upper or bottom depth lines at all. So it's very helpful to just pay attention and not just to put them all in the same without thinking. I decided to draw this decoration in the tiles because it is a fairly plain structure as is, and I think it just adds a really, really nice touch visually to our doorway. I draw that line not very well, but I do intend to hatch this pattern to create a bit of color effect. So I'm not too worried, I can always fix that then. And now I'll just define where that ends and put in this window. I do a very bad line here that misses by a mile. So I'm thinking, how can I disguise that? So just finishing now where it hits the line, So now I do the hatch in here. I'm drawing this with a 0.3mm pen. And you're watching this video at 1.5 times, so it's sped up half as much again from my real time in drawing. It took me about 14 minutes to draw, I think, maybe a bit less than that. And now to do the pattern on the other side of the doorway. This line's important because it does create a sense of the doorway being stepped back from street level, and now I'm just doing the immediate left hand side of the doorway because that will also help define the doorway. Still trying to work out what to do with this line. I'm thinking, I could just thicken this line, and even though there's no justification for that in the reference, it won't be as obvious to anyone looking at my drawing. And so now I just do this little part. It's important to get this lower perspective angle correct because that really gives a sense of the side of that building moving away from us. Again, a bit of hatching just to bring it in line with the other one. And I add some hatching on the tread of this step just again to create the effect more of it being a horizontal surface and therefore moving back into space and increasing the 3D effect of this doorway. You notice I put a few guidelines there for me. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this doorway fun to watch. I hope you find it even more fun to draw. You'll find the reference on my channel community page, but whatever you're drawing, however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.